The grand warship, indomitable, glided through the dark expanse of space, its hull gleaming like a sword drawn for battle. Admiral Marcus Valen stood at the command center, arms crossed behind his back, a smirk dancing on his lips. To him, this was just another routine skirmish, nothing more than a warm-up before his fleet moved on to bigger conquests. The small alien race before him, primitive, technologically backward, was no match for humanity's dominance. They had conquered countless species before, and this one would fall just as easily. Admiral, we're approaching the alien fleet. Scanners show only a handful of ships. They seem disorganized, Sir, reported Lieutenant Hale, barely hiding his own confidence. Valen let out a dismissive chuckle, his gaze fixed on the holographic display showing the alien vessels scattered across the sector. Of course they are, he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. They're primitive, probably still trying to figure out how to power their ships. This will be over in minutes. The command deck buzzed with activity, officers moving with a casual ease that belied the supposed threat looming ahead. No one felt the need to rush after all. What could possibly go wrong? These aliens were nothing more than a footnote in humanity's long history of victories. They won't know what hit them, Valen muttered, more to himself than anyone else. His hand hovered over the tactical console, fingers itching to give the command. Prepare the fleet. Full assault in 5 minutes. Yes, Sir, Hale replied, almost gleefully, as he relayed the orders. The crew moved with practiced efficiency, but there was an air of overconfidence, a sense that they had already won. The fleet was unbeatable, and these aliens, whoever they were, would crumble like the others before them. Valen's smirk deepened as he watched the alien ships through the observation window. Their vessels were crude, blocky things, almost laughable in their design. Compared to the sleek, polished warships of humanity, these aliens seemed as though they hadn't advanced in millennia. Primitive fools, Valen murmured. They probably still communicate with smoke signals, the officers around him chuckled, feeding off his arrogance. This was a game, a show of force to remind the galaxy who was in charge. Humanity. Sir, all ships are in position. Ready for your command, Hale announced, standing at attention with a confidence bordering on cockiness. Good. Let's give these aliens a show they won't forget, Valen said, his voice laced with condescension. He straightened his uniform and gave a quick nod. Launch the first wave. The human fleet surged forward, warships bristling with weapons, their sleek forms cutting through space like blades. The Admiral watched with a sense of superiority as the alien ships failed to form any coherent defense. It was laughable. Their scattered formation only reinforced the idea that this battle would be over before it even began. Just look at them, Valen sneered. They don't even know what they're doing. They're not even worth our time. The officers around him nodded in agreement, their screens lighting up with tactical data that only confirmed what they already believed: this was no real fight. It was a slaughter waiting to happen. Valen stepped forward, his eyes narrowing at the sight before him. Tell the fleet to prepare for a quick mop-up operation, he ordered. This should be over in minutes. We'll be back home before supper. The crew laughed, the tension non-existent. This was what they were built for, what they lived for: easy victories, conquests, and domination. Nothing could stand in their way. The Admiral allowed himself a moment of satisfaction, confident that today would end like every other day, with humanity victorious and another species crushed beneath their heel. Let's end this, Valen said with a cold smile, unaware that his overconfidence would soon turn into the greatest miscalculation of his career. The fleet of humanity's finest warships hung in the void like predators poised to strike, their sleek, polished hulls gleaming under the distant starlight. Each vessel was a marvel of human engineering, crafted with precision and designed for one purpose: domination. The largest among them, indomitable, commanded attention, its sheer size and flawless exterior a testament to humanity's technological superiority. Rows of turrets bristled along its sides, and energy shields shimmered faintly, making the ship look invincible, untouchable. Inside the command center, Admiral Valen surveyed the scene with a sense of pride. Every inch of the fleet exuded power, from the smallest frigate to the towering dreadnoughts that formed the backbone of their assault. There was no doubt in his mind no force in the galaxy could rival this armada. They had wiped out enemies far more dangerous than this ragtag group of aliens, and today would be no different. As the fleet drifted closer to the alien vessels, the contrast between the two forces became glaringly obvious. The alien ships were rough, almost primitive in appearance, their surfaces pocked with dents and scars. Their designs lacked the sleek precision of the human warships, and from a distance they appeared outdated, as if they were relics from a long-forgotten era. The human officers exchanged smug glances, silently affirming what they already believed this would be an easy victory. "Look at those rust buckets," Lieutenant Hale muttered, shaking his head. "Do they even know what century it is?" Valen chuckled at the remark, but kept his eyes on the alien fleet. "They don't stand a chance," he said, his voice thick with confidence. "It's almost unfair." Yet, despite the overwhelming sense of superiority, there was something about the alien vessels that nagged at the back of Valen's mind. They moved slowly, almost deliberately, as though they weren't in any rush to engage. The way their formation shifted was unusual, too chaotic on the surface, but there was a rhythm to it, a pattern that was difficult to pin down. He dismissed the thought. What could these backward aliens possibly have that would pose a threat to the finest fleet in the galaxy? Their ships were barely held together, clunky and unsophisticated, as though they had been scavenged from the remnants of past battles. Still, Valen couldn't help but notice subtle details that seemed off. The alien vessels were oddly quiet, no comm signals, no attempts to negotiate, no defensive maneuvers. They just drifted in space, waiting, as if they weren't concerned with the approaching human fleet. A small frown creased his brow. "What's their game?" he muttered under his breath. But the thought was quickly drowned out by the overwhelming confidence that filled the room. Every officer in the command center was focused on the upcoming victory, their screens filled with tactical data that only confirmed the aliens' inferiority. "They're probably too scared to make the first move," Hale said, grinning. "Not that it'll matter." The Admiral nodded, his eyes still fixed on the alien ships. He could feel it now, something was amiss. There was a tension in the air, a quiet unease that he couldn't quite place. The alien ships might look primitive, but their movement wasn't random. And why hadn't they tried to flee? Most enemies, when faced with the might of the human fleet, would either run or beg for mercy. But these aliens simply waited. His fingers drummed on the console as he stared at the strange, silent fleet. "Keep an eye on them," he ordered, his voice tight. "Something's not right." But his crew didn't share his concern. After all, how could these outdated vessels, with their rough, patchwork exteriors, pose any real danger to the most advanced fleet in the galaxy? They were invincible, or so they believed. And yet, as the human warships edged closer, Valen couldn't shake the feeling that they had underestimated their enemy in a way that could prove disastrous. The moment had arrived. With the human fleet in position, Admiral Valen leaned forward, the familiar rush of confidence surging through him as he prepared to give the order. The alien vessels still hung in the distance, scattered and disorganized. To his eyes, it was a formation ripe for annihilation. "Initiate the attack," Valen ordered, his voice steady, laced with arrogance. At his command, the human warships launched into action. Bright streaks of light cut through the dark expanse of space as missile barrages and energy beams hurtled toward the alien fleet. The first wave of firepower slammed into the alien vessels, and for a moment it seemed as though the battle would end as quickly as it had begun. Several alien ships exploded in a flash of light, debris scattering like fireworks. The bridge erupted in cheers, and Valen allowed himself a smug smile. "I told you," he muttered under his breath. "This will be over in minutes." The fleet pressed on, continuing their assault. The alien ships moved erratically, their scattered formation making it seem as though they were in disarray, unable to mount a coherent defense. Valen watched with amusement, certain that the aliens were merely floundering under the weight of human firepower. "Admiral, their defenses are weak," one officer reported, eyes glued to the tactical display. They're barely putting up a fight. Valen nodded, pleased. Good. Increase the pressure. Let's finish this quickly. But just as the human fleet closed in for the kill, something unexpected happened. The alien ships, which had appeared to be fleeing, suddenly shifted. It wasn't chaotic retreat, it was something far more deliberate. The scattered vessels moved with purpose, darting into positions that, at first, seemed random, but soon revealed a complex pattern. There, regrouping, Hale said, frowning. But how? They were just scattered a moment ago. Valen narrowed his eyes. They're trying to stall. Press forward. Don't let them regroup. The human ships surged ahead, but the alien vessels began moving faster, evading the attacks with a precision that caught the human commanders off guard. Valen's smile faded slightly as he watched the tactical screen. The aliens' movements weren't random at all, they were coordinated, deliberate, like pieces in a larger strategy. A ripple of confusion spread through the command deck. Sir, their ships are outmaneuvering our fire, a young officer called out, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Valen frowned. Outmaneuvering? That's impossible. These ships are primitive. Keep up the pressure. The tension in the room rose as the human fleet found themselves firing into empty space, their weapons missing their targets by fractions. The alien vessels had dispersed in a way that defied the humans' expectations, darting in and out of the human formation with unexpected agility. They weren't retreating at all, they were preparing. What's happening? Hale muttered, his confidence wavering. They should be retreating, but they're regrouping. It's like they're anticipating our moves. The Admiral's fingers tightened around the edge of the console. Something's not right, he said quietly, his tone betraying the first hint of doubt. Stay on them. Don't give them room to breathe. But it was becoming increasingly clear that the humans had miscalculated. The alien ships weren't just running, they were leading the human fleet into something. Valen's mind raced as the realization began to take shape, but he pushed it aside. They couldn't be outsmarted by these backward aliens. It was impossible. They're scattering again, an officer called out, his voice sharp with confusion. No, Valen said, his eyes narrowing at the tactical display. They're not scattering. They're flanking us. Suddenly, the alien vessels shifted into position, surrounding the human fleet in a way no one had expected. It wasn't retreat, it was a trap. For the first time, the Admiral's confidence wavered as the alien ships began their counterattack, hitting the human vessels with a precision that sent shock waves through the fleet. Valen's voice lowered, tension finally seeping in. What in the hell are they doing? The arrogance that had once filled the room began to dissolve, replaced by an unsettling confusion as the humans realized they had underestimated their enemy. Admiral Valen stood frozen, staring at the tactical display as the alien fleet completed its maneuver. The human warships, once the predators, were now surrounded by the very ships they had dismissed as weak and primitive. The shift was so sudden, so perfectly executed, that it felt like a waking nightmare. What just happened? Lieutenant Hale stammered, his earlier confidence shattered. The command deck, once filled with smug remarks and laughter, had fallen eerily silent. Confusion and disbelief hung in the air like a fog. The alien ships moved with a grace and precision that should have been impossible for vessels that appeared so outdated. Their rough exteriors had hidden something far more dangerous and advanced, coordinated fleet that had just lured the humans into a trap. They've surrounded us, an officer whispered, his voice barely audible over the rising tension. Valen's hands gripped the console tightly, knuckles white. This can't be right, he muttered, his voice low and uncertain for the first time. How could they? Before he could finish, the alien fleet struck. Beams of energy and bursts of plasma fire rained down on the human warships from all directions. The attack was surgical, each shot targeting the weak points in the human shields and armor. It was as if the aliens had studied every vulnerability of the human fleet and were exploiting them with deadly precision. Shields down on the vanguard. They're tearing through us, an officer cried out, panic rising in his voice. Valen's heart raced as the screen lit up with flashing warnings. Hull breaches, shield failures, weapons systems offline. The human fleet, once so invincible, was now being systematically dismantled. The arrogance that had filled the room just moments ago had vanished, replaced by sheer panic. Return fire. Regroup. Get us out of this formation, Valen barked, trying to regain control, but his voice betrayed the growing fear. The humans had been caught completely off guard, and now they were paying the price. The alien ships moved like phantoms, appearing and disappearing from the human scanners with unnerving speed. Their weapons cut through the human fleet's defenses as though they were paper, and every attempt to strike back was met with failure. The humans were blind to their enemy's true strength, and now it was too late. Admiral, they're exploiting every weakness in our defenses, Hale said, his voice shaking as he stared at the display in disbelief. It's like they knew exactly where to hit us. Valen's mind raced. How had this happened? How had they, the most advanced fleet in the galaxy, been outsmarted by these aliens? The very idea seemed impossible, yet the evidence was undeniable. The aliens had planned this from the start, hiding their true strength behind a facade of weakness, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. They were playing us, Valen whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. They knew we'd underestimate them. A massive explosion rocked the command center as one of the human ships, the Resolute, was torn apart by a barrage of alien fire. The shockwave sent officers tumbling, sparks flying from damaged consoles. Panic spread like wildfire through the deck. "We need to retreat," an officer shouted, his voice barely audible over the alarms blaring across the ship. "We can't hold them off." But there was no retreat. The alien fleet had closed every escape route, boxing the humans in, their ships tightening around the human fleet like a noose. Valen could see it now. There was no way out. They had walked into an ambush, and the aliens weren't going to let them escape. "Admiral, we're losing ships fast," Hale called out, panic clear in his voice. "What are your orders?" Valen stood there, his mind blank, his earlier arrogance now a distant memory. He had underestimated these aliens, and now his fleet, his once invincible fleet, was being decimated before his eyes. The panic that had been simmering beneath the surface finally erupted. Officers scrambled, shouting orders, but it was chaos. The humans, once so certain of their victory, were now struggling just to survive. And the aliens, once thought to be primitive and weak, were proving themselves far more deadly than anyone could have imagined. The relentless assault continued, the human fleet barely holding on as alien ships swarmed around them, cutting through their once impenetrable defenses with brutal efficiency. The Indomitable, the pride of the fleet, shuddered under the barrage of alien fire. Sparks flew from consoles, alarms blared, and the hull groaned as it took hit after hit. What had once seemed like a flawless, polished machine was now on the verge of collapse. "Sir, we've lost another cruiser," an officer shouted, his voice strained with panic. "The Endurance is gone." Admiral Valen could barely process the words. His mind raced, searching for a way out, but the situation was unraveling too fast. Every strategy he had counted on had failed. The alien ships, those crude, primitive-looking vessels, were more advanced than he could have ever imagined. Their weapons tore through the human ships as if they were made of paper, and their tactics were flawless, exploiting every weakness in the human formation. "They're not just outgunning us," Hale muttered, his face pale. "They're outsmarting us." Valen could see it now. The aliens had been watching, studying. Every move the humans made, the aliens countered with terrifying precision. What had once seemed like a disorganized, inferior fleet was now revealed as a highly coordinated force. They had been playing the long game, waiting for the humans to overextend themselves, and now they were striking with deadly intent. The Indomitable shuddered again as another blast ripped through its shields, sending a wave of sparks and debris across the bridge. Valen stumbled, catching himself on the edge of the console, his mind reeling. How had it come to this? How had he let his arrogance blind him so completely? "Admiral, we can't hold this position much longer," an officer called out, his voice rising with desperation. Our shields are failing across the fleet. We're losing ships faster than we can regroup. Valen clenched his fists, his knuckles white. We have to fight back, he growled, but even as he said the words, he knew it was hopeless. The human fleet, once so invincible, was being systematically dismantled. The aliens were pressing their advantage with ruthless efficiency, their ships darting in and out of formation, their weapons cutting through the human vessels like knives. Suddenly, one of the alien ships appeared on the main display, a hulking, organic-looking vessel that seemed to pulse with energy. It hovered ominously at the edge of the battlefield, its silhouette massive against the backdrop of stars. For a moment, everything seemed to stop. What is that? Hale whispered, his voice trembling. Valen stared at the ship, dread settling in the pit of his stomach. The ship was like nothing he had ever seen before alive, almost, its surface shimmering with an otherworldly glow. As he watched, the alien vessel unleashed a blinding beam of energy that sliced through space, cutting one of the human dreadnoughts in half in a single, devastating strike. Panic swept through the bridge. "They've got super weapons," an officer cried, his voice breaking with fear. "We're finished." The human fleet, battered and broken, was in complete disarray. Ships exploded in bright flashes of light, one after the other, as the alien fleet unleashed its full power. Valen's mind reeled as he watched his fleet, his once mighty, invincible fleet, fall apart before his eyes. "They were toying with us," he muttered, the realization hitting him like a blow. "They let us think we had the upper hand, and now they're finishing us off." The alien fleet continued its assault, showing no mercy. The humans were trapped, outgunned, and outmaneuvered. There was no escape, no chance for victory. The aliens had revealed their true strength, and it was far beyond anything the humans had imagined. The battle was over. The once proud fleet of humanity lay in ruins, scattered debris floating aimlessly through the cold, unforgiving void of space. The Indomitable, crippled and broken, drifted helplessly, its once gleaming hull now a twisted wreck of metal and fire. Admiral Valen stood on the bridge, staring blankly at the carnage before him, the weight of defeat crushing his chest. "We've lost." "Everything," Lieutenant Hale whispered, his voice hollow. The command center was eerily quiet now, the chaos replaced by a stunned, disbelieving silence. The survivors aboard the Indomitable could only watch as the alien ships, their hidden strength now fully revealed, calmly circled the wreckage of the human fleet. Valen felt numb. His arrogance, his belief in humanity's invincibility had blinded him. They had underestimated their enemy, and now they were paying the price. The alien fleet, which they had so easily dismissed, had proven to be more than a match for them, and now humanity's pride lay in ruins. The main screen flickered to life, and the image of an alien leader appeared, a figure shrouded in shadows, their features barely discernible. But the voice that echoed across the bridge was clear, calm, and laced with cold authority. "You thought you could dominate us," the alien leader said, their tone dripping with disdain. "You thought your technology, your arrogance, made you superior. But we have watched you. We have studied you. And now you know what it is to be weak." Valen's throat tightened as the alien's words cut through him. They had known. The aliens had seen humanity's arrogance, had anticipated their every move, and had prepared for this moment. They hadn't just defeated the human fleet, they had shattered their illusion of invincibility. "You are not the rulers of this galaxy," the alien continued. "You are not invincible. Today you have learned a lesson in humility." Valen's mind swirled with the weight of the alien's words. They were right. Humanity in its hubris had believed itself untouchable, unbeatable. And now they had been humbled. The cost of their arrogance was staggering, thousands of lives lost, their once mighty fleet reduced to nothing but debris. As the alien leader's transmission ended, Valen sank into his chair, his hands trembling. The bridge was silent, every officer too shocked, too broken to speak. The battle was over, but the scars it left would haunt them for a long time. "We thought we were invincible," Valen muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible. "We were wrong." The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of that realization. Humanity had been knocked down from its pedestal, forced to confront its own weaknesses. The galaxy was far more dangerous than they had imagined, and they had been foolish to think they could conquer it so easily. Valen stared out at the stars, his heart heavy with regret. He had led his fleet into this disaster, blinded by pride. Now, all that was left was the wreckage of their once great ambition. Perhaps, he thought bitterly, this was the lesson they needed. A reminder that arrogance was a weakness in itself. As the alien ships began to pull away, their victory complete, Valen couldn't help but wonder if humanity would ever recover from this blow. They had been humbled, yes, but would they learn? Would they rise again, wiser and more cautious? Or would they let their pride lead them down this path once more? Only time would tell.